Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth fired the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, General Randy George, and two other top Army generals on Thursday. Dismissals that come as the U.S. appears poised to intensify strikes, and the Pentagon is weighing a potential ground invasion in Iran. In a post, Chief Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell framed General George's firing as a retirement, effective immediately. A U.S. official told CNN that senior Army leadership had been caught off guard. Quote, "It doesn't feel like a very thought-out decision," unquote. Now, I have been personally covering General Randy George's career for about 15 years. I wrote a book in 2012 about the ill-fated combat outpost Keating, which had been, in 2006, placed in a dangerous position in Afghanistan. Then Colonel Randy George and his Lieutenant Colonel Brad Brown tried to shut down that outpost in 2008 because of the precarious position it was in, although their warnings were not heeded with any urgency. And then Cop Keating was devastatingly attacked in 2009. Those who know General Randy George consider him to be well-respected, smart, strategic, someone who acts with the best interests of his service members and the United States at the top of his mind. His dismissal, along with that of Chief of Chaplains Major General William Green Jr., and Commander of Army Transformation and Training Command General David Hodne are just the latest in a string of abrupt firings that Hegseth has carried out inside the Pentagon since he took office. Hegseth has fired more than a dozen senior military officers over the last year. In fact, he's almost completely remade the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Just two officials remain from before President Trump took office: Marine Corps Commandant General Eric Smith and Chief of Space Operations General B. Chance Saltzman. Now, you might have noticed if you look at that photo, Hegseth's version of the Joint Chiefs, those are entirely white men, despite the fact that as of 2024, nearly 33% of active duty service members are of color and nearly 18% are women. Hegseth made it quite clear that that type of representation in the top ranks does not matter to him.
The era of DEI is gone at the Defense Department, and we need the best and brightest. Physical standards must be high and gender neutral. If women can make it, excellent. If not, it is what it is. We're reviving the warrior ethos. We're eliminating the distractions and the debris. No more DEI.
Two of the first leaders Hegseth let go were former Joint Chiefs Chair General C.Q. Brown, the second black officer to hold that post, and Chief of Naval Operations Lisa Franchetti, the first woman to lead the U.S. Navy. Just last week, the New York Times reported that in an extraordinarily rare move, Hegseth was actively blocking the promotions of 4 Army officers. Officials saying 2 of the officers are black, 2 of them are women. Parnell defended the promotion process to the New York Times as apolitical and unbiased, unquote. The New York Times reports that Army Secretary Dan Driscoll repeatedly refused to let Hegseth strike those officers' names from the promotion list. Officials told the Times that Driscoll took heat from Hegseth's Chief of Staff, the controversial Ricky Berea, for promoting Major General Antoinette Gant to command the military district of Washington. The Times reporting, quote, "Mr. Berea told Mr. Driscoll that President Trump would not want to stand next to a black female officer at military events," the official said, unquote. Berea denies that story. Driscoll is someone Hegseth perceives as a threat, sources tell CNN. Unsurprisingly, he has worked closely with the now retired General Randy George. Hegseth's firing sprees targeting women, targeting people of color, or even just those he feels personally threatened by. This all comes as the U.S. is weighing a further escalation in the already unpopular war in Iran, a ground invasion that could potentially risk the lives of thousands of troops, which only 11% of U.S. adults polled by CNN support. In that same poll, incidentally, Secretary Hegseth himself is registering at a 35% approval rating, with 65% of the American people disapproving. And now, without the guidance of tenured military officials who have served for decades honorably, that guidance, because Secretary Hegseth is either dismissed or hamstrung for reasons that remain unclear to even top military officers, now the Trump administration is scrambling to prove to the American people that there is a clear plan for the war in Iran and that it's worth the costs of thousands of U.S. troops that they're putting in harm's way. Let's bring in Washington Post reporter Dan Lamothe, who covers the Pentagon, and the military has broken a lot of these stories. Dan, can you put in perspective what the firing of General Randy George will mean for the leadership of the Pentagon right now?
Yeah, I mean, Randy George has been in the Army for more than 40 years. I met him just maybe a year or two after you did, when he was a 1-star general at the Army War College in Pennsylvania. He's a thoughtful guy. I honestly have no idea which party he would belong to politically. He kind of adheres to that old school nonpartisan sort of idea that you would hope for in your generals.
So a source familiar with what happened tells me that the firing was entirely about these promotions and personnel matters. That's the reason, and that General George requested a meeting with Hegseth. Hegseth refused to give it to him, and they fired him and leaked it to the media at the same time. What's going on here? Why would Hegseth do this?
I think this is a significant final data point in sort of the Randy George Army saga under Hegseth. I do think it's more complex than it being just about this event. My own reporting would suggest that there's been sort of this churn on this. How long will Randy George last? Whether or not Randy George is acceptable to Hegseth, really going back many months. And that Dan Driscoll, who had really kind of hit a good teamwork kind of vibe with the general, really did like him, really did want to keep him, and was increasingly frustrated trying to make the case to Secretary Hegseth.
What was the issue beyond the issue of personnel and promotions? What are the other issues?
I mean, I think some of it is the senior Pentagon staff right now. There are people who literally are combing through biographies, combing through past testimony, looking for what they said on diversity 3, 5, 7 years ago, and kind of building a dossier of sorts, trying to assemble who kind of fits the mold they're looking for. Randy George had served under the Biden administration. Randy George specifically had been a senior military assistant to Lloyd Austin, Biden's defense secretary. In testimony, when asked candid questions, he was in favor of diversity as part of a broader effort to have unit cohesion in the Army.
There are thousands of troops deployed to the Middle East right now, as we all wait to see if the U.S. is going to commence with a ground operation in Iran. Is there a sense that there's any confidence that give us the sense of confidence in Hegseth's leadership among those who are directly impacted in the U.S. military?
I think it's pretty divided. I don't think by any means it's universally against. There are people who really kind of buy into his lethality rhetoric, but there is significant concern that he's perhaps not fully appreciating the gravity of this situation, particularly when you look at things today, like the pilot down on the ground. This is something that was a foreseeable circumstance in a serious campaign with numerous aircraft up against a country that also has anti-aircraft.
Dan Lamothe, The Washington Post. Thank you so much. Good to have you, sir.
There is rarely a good time to do a shakeup in the military. And now Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has pushed out 3 generals during wartime. First, U.S. Army Chief of Staff General Randy George was ordered to retire yesterday. And now we've learned 2 more generals have been forced out. Major General William Green, Jr., who served as the Chief of Chaplains, and General David Hodne, commander of the Army Transformation and Training Command. Now the military is missing critical combat experience as the war with Iran enters week 6. And joining me now, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Russel Honore. General, good to see you again. Let me ask you about these 3 generals who have been pushed out by Secretary Hegseth. The Pentagon has not given an explicit reason for why they were fired. What do you make of the dismissals?
Well, I've been quite two traditional as well as decisions about the going into boots on the ground in Iran, that the secretary, the chief of staff of the Army would have had some major input on. The boots on the ground decision, when and where. His job is to prepare. His job is to make sure all the air defenses that's been defending our allies are prepared. And sometime I've served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a 2-star general. The service chiefs do have a vote and try to influence the decisions made by the Secretary of Defense and by the President. And I sense with this Secretary of Defense, disagreement means dissent, and that if there's not good discussions on what decision is going to be made and how they're going to do it, then they serve no purpose. I think what he's looking for is yes people, loyalists who will do what he says and how he said do it, as opposed to following the customs and traditions of the military that we want to have active debate before we do something. I don't think he tolerates that. If you go question him on why did you take those officers off the promotion list? Why are we changing the rank of the chaplains? Maybe we ought to discuss this. He does not tolerate any discussion. He's got a big ego problem, and that could have long-standing impact to our military.
General Russel Honore, thank you so much for being with me this evening. Always good to see you.
Good evening. God bless America, and hopefully we can find that pilot.
Indeed.
Tonight, a shakeup at the Pentagon amid the ongoing war in Iran. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has fired the Army's top general. And a source tells CNN that Hegseth told Army Chief of Staff General Randy George to retire immediately. 2 other senior leaders are also out. Another source reveals that the decision to fire George was abrupt, but expected. George and Hegseth had been at odds for months after Hegseth blocked the promotion of several Army officers, including 2 women and 2 who are Black. The source says that George demanded to see Hegseth about the issue, but Hegseth denied the meeting. The purge comes just days after President Trump signaled that the U.S. would intensify strikes in Iran, and as the Pentagon weighs a potential ground invasion. Isaiah Martin is here with us. It is, even outside of all of the interpersonal drama, of which there is plenty about this, we're in the middle of a war. And the Army Chief of Staff and to just be purging members of the top military brass in this moment just seems unwise, if not just a great gift to our enemies in terms of what they can say about us in this moment.
Well, I certainly think that the Iranian regime couldn't have seen or gotten something better for them in this instance. I think ultimately what's happening right now is that the United States military is seeing that we're completely have a leadership that is just simply, we don't understand where we're going. I'm particularly concerned about the fact that, the target seems to be moving consistently. I know for this, first it said that there was not going to be a ground invasion. Then we see reports that there could potentially be one. I think that's an issue. And the fact that we're seeing this change in leadership right now, I think is a sign that we don't really know what's going on.
I think to provide some context for it, right? So the armed services, so the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, their job is what we call man, train, and equip. Their job is to recruit the forces, train them, and make sure they're equipped to go to war. And then when we fight a war, there's a 4-star commander in charge of the combatant commands around the world, where we're basically broken up worldwide in geography, and there's a 4-star responsible for fighting in the different areas. So right now the war is being fought by U.S. Central Command. So there's a 4-star commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, down in Tampa, who's responsible for the fight. The Army's job is to transfer forces in accordance with the war plan if there's ground troops or the Navy or the Air Force, regardless. So the folks that were let go today or that were fired, you had the chief of chaplains. There's been a problem where I think the secretary said he had an issue with what he saw as secular humanism in the chaplains corps ranks. You want to move back?
I just want to note that
Yep.
it's apparently the first time that the chief of chaplains has ever been fired.
Oh, yeah, in the history of the military.
It's a 4-year term.
In the history of the military, it's the first time there. The chief of the training side, he said issues with training, and then him, General George, you just mentioned, had an issue going back to that. But this is part of a series of firings that we've seen across the administration. And I think, as you noted, just in terms of demographics, women make up about 20% of the military, a little bit less than that, a little bit less than 8%.
17%.
17%. And then the general officer ranks only about 8%. But there's been a disproportionate number of women and minority general officers that were fired. And the argument's kind of coming back. Are they being fired because they're minorities, and whether it's gender or ethnic or racial minorities, or is this for another reason? I think the secretary is coming back and saying that some people were put in positions they shouldn't have been in as a result of that. Other people are saying no, that they deserve to be there, and you're firing them as a result. And that's the two sides of the argument people are making.
And General George, as well as the Army Secretary. So let's not forget the Secretary of Army is a political appointee. So you have here the civilian and the military leadership of the Army working very closely together. And apparently that was part of Hegseth's problem, is that he had these two people working closely together.
And just a little bit of context on that. I mean, CNN's reporting is that Randy George was very close to Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, and Hegseth perceived Driscoll as a threat and at times had a contentious relationship with him. Driscoll is also close to J.D. Vance, has been mentioned as a possible replacement for Hegseth.
Yep.
Hegseth's, since Signalgate, since that chat where he was sharing classified information, he seems to be on shaky ground, or at least his perception of his job. And there's some reporting that this is a result of that.
I will say it so you don't have to. He is signaling that he is a very insecure leader right now because he's getting rid of expertise surrounding him. General George brought the Army out of a massive recruitment crisis back in 2020, one of the worst we've seen. He brought it back to full force. He moved to adapt and accommodate for the cheap drones and acquisition of cheap drones that we're seeing prevalent in the war in Ukraine, which, oh, by the way, happened to be drones from Iran. So he was doing what he was supposed to do. Him and Secretary Driscoll also both spoke up about the fact that people don't get on these lists for flags to become general officers without having exemplary service. So I find it very interesting that somebody apolitical in the Army Chief of Staff, somebody Republican appointed under Trump, that is who the current Secretary of War is going after.
Jason?
Well, I think Pete Hegseth plays a huge role in recruitment. And I think that's a key reason why you're seeing so many more people volunteering to serve. I think if you don't have trust in the people around you, whether or not they come with expertise, and I have no doubt that they came with expertise, but it's kind of useless if you don't actually trust it. We don't know really what was behind this. Now, again, the reporting suggests that there's some conflict or tension between the two from a personality perspective, perhaps. Maybe this was a case of align versus agree, and they could do neither. But when you're in a position like this, you have to make sure that you trust the people around you. When General McChrystal was fired during the Afghanistan war by President Obama because he downplayed the importance of, at the time, Vice President Joe Biden, while it was obviously a news story, I don't recall some of the same framing. Now, this could be a huge deal, right, at the end of this. We don't know. Right now, it doesn't appear to be a huge deal as far as readiness is concerned with what's going on in Iran right this moment.
But it does say a lot about Pete Hegseth, for sure.
Well,
because it
without knowing his reason.
Well, it says, I mean, you're saying we don't know, but there's actually a lot of reporting that suggests that there are several reasons, including insecurity, as Naira pointed out, but also, I mean, his hand or attempt to have a hand in personnel decisions has been something that across the forces, not just in the Army, has been a problem for senior leadership. He's taking a list of potential one-star promotions that doesn't get political, that is merit-based, that's based on a long process in the military, and he's striking individual names, which, you know, according to the reporting, it's not even clear if it's legal for him to do that. So there's the broader picture is of somebody who is a defense secretary who is dealing with both some personality drama, but also has a leadership style that's resulting in mass firings. I'm not sure mass firings are ever really a good sign.
The pattern that I see, and it's not true in every instance, but the pattern that I'm seeing is Secretary Hegseth resents dissent and disagreement, and he resents anyone who he believes is a holdover from the Biden administration. He wants to pick his team. He doesn't want a team that was picked for him. And that is largely who he's been targeting with these firings, are people who he feels like he was stuck with. And to Jason's point, he wants people that he trusts, not people that he's told to trust, but people that he trusts.
But I mean, let's be honest. I mean, this is the military. Virtually everybody at the star level is a holdover from the previous administration. They didn't just show up. They were there because they're all serving under the United States military and whoever the president is at the time.
But if you
how is that a reason to fire people?
So if you go into this believing that there has to be some systemic change because you believe that a lot of the problems as he perceives them is due to the fact that everyone is in fact a holdover, then this does make sense. And to be clear, unfortunately, there's going to be another Democratic president who's then going to make the exact same changes.
Say that again. So you're suggesting that his belief is that any person in the military is a holdover from the previous administration, which is virtually everyone, is a problem?
I think he views any kind of non-institutionalized change as part of the issues within the department.
We also know, and I don't want to downplay this because we also know he's written a book about this, that he believes that women in the military are a problem. We also know that he believes that people of color are in large part not qualified for all kinds of different, what he calls DEI reasons. And so when we see actions that are supported by his own words, that's why there are questions about what the motivation is.
And the entire idea of having a professional force, right, after the Warren Commission, after Vietnam, and not to have drafting family members willy-nilly, was a professionalized force that was separate from all of these political challenges. So listen, if he has an issue with his Secretary of Army, who is a political appointee and maybe threatening, got it. But people who actually know, who have served in Iraq, served in Afghanistan, know how war is conducted, have actually made great gains for our military strength and adaptability, those are probably not the people you want walking out the door.
Yeah.
Do you have a quick last
Yeah,
word?
just a quick. So, I mean, I think across the board, normally you see 3 and 4 stars being interviewed by the Secretary of Defense before they get promoted in those positions, confirmed by the Senate. So, in terms of an institutional change, yes, we also saw the firing of most of the career ambassadors who were appointed on the previous administration. So, we are seeing institutional change across the government, from the State Department, the Pentagon, et cetera. But when you look at the disproportionate numbers for who is getting fired, right, and where that's coming from, I think it does get back to the root question that's there. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Is he seeing the folks that were in those positions put there because he saw them as illegitimately put in those positions based on not being qualified, that they were somehow put there for being a minority, or were they actually qualified to be there and they're now being targeted as a result of their gender or race? And that's the two sides of the debate right now that are going on in Washington. He's saying folks aren't qualified. Other folks are saying you're targeting people.
And obviously, I mean, you've got people inside the Pentagon, in the high ranks of the Trump Pentagon, who believe that he was wrong to strike those names for whatever reason that he wanted to strike them. Alex, thanks a lot for being here.